President Ramaphosa will reply to the parliamentary debate on his post-COVID-19 economic recovery plan within the next hour. We'll take that live on the channel. The President presenting the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan last week, you'll remember. He said government will set aside 100 billion rand to ensure the strategy is realized. The plan, he says, the result of extensive deliberation between government and its social partners, including business and labour. So what are we expecting this afternoon? I'm going to talk now to senior Absa economist Peter Worthington. Good afternoon to you and welcome. You've expressed concern, Peter, that there's not enough focus on private sector recovery. What would you be hoping to hear?
Well, I think the plan is very much as the President has already announced. One of the key planks of the plan, obviously, is this focus on job creation, which I think is exactly right. It's one of the very important issues we need to address in South Africa. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that a public works program is really going to cut it as far as generating the quantum of jobs that South Africa needs. And personally, I would have preferred if we had seen the money that's going to be devoted to those public work opportunities to be put instead to the employment tax incentive, a big expansion of that. But I don't think we're going to get an awful lot. We're not going to see a change in the program focus. And in fact, when you actually look at the focus, the four priority areas that the President outlined, jobs, reindustrialization, energy security, etc., they're the right objectives. But we don't have an awful lot of the implementing details. We don't know how some of the programs are going to be funded. And, for example, if we think about the localization initiative, I'm all in favor of a Buy South Africa campaign, but you have to be very nuanced in the way that you apply it. Otherwise, you end up with sort of an import substitution program that just ends up pushing up input costs for a whole bunch of producers and distributors. So I think, we want to see the implementing details, including how different aspects of the program are going to be funded.
He says that government is going to set aside 100 billion rand to ensure that the strategy is realized. To your point, though, Peter, we don't have a clear idea as to where the money is coming from, apart from vague statements about making South Africa a premier investment destination.
Well, that's right. And when he uses the phrase set aside, presumably what he is talking about is an allocation out of the fiscus. And as we know, we are completely out of fiscal room to maneuver. And so I think we'll have a much clearer picture of what the program there is, or what Ramaphosa is meaning when we actually see the outlines of the medium-term budget policy statement next week. That is going to set spending ceilings within which spending departments are going to have to operate. And we will know how much money has been carved out of some areas of spending to allocate to the recovery program. But I don't think it's going to be an easy task because big chunks of the budget already are items that you really cannot cut, like interest on the growing debt, public sector wages, and, of course, social grants. So there's not an awful lot else to cut to carve out this 100 billion.
And an increased tax burden is almost impossible.
Well, I think that depends on what taxes we're talking about. I think if you look at personal income tax, there is some evidence that we may be on the wrong side of the Laffer curve, at which sort of increases in the tax rate don't generate much in the way of revenues because they just destroy the tax base. But we could quite successfully, I think, from an economic perspective, increase VAT. But I think politically that's a very tall order. And of course, corporate income taxes, well, there's no point in increasing them when the corporates are not profitable. So I think we have some scope to increase taxes, but we would have to be quite careful about it. And we're going to run up against this issue that the economic rationality is in conflict with the political rationality about which taxes to increase. I think come budget time in February, we're probably going to get some increases come through in personal income tax. But I don't think that they can go terribly far. It will be styled, of course, as a solidarity tax. And I think everybody understands that in this terrible crisis, it's the less well-off who have suffered the most. And so some call for solidarity is probably going to pay dividends. I would certainly be very happy to do that. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're already a very highly taxed country with a very small segment of the population and indeed a small segment of the corporate world as well who are paying most of the tax.
And the elephant in the room that no one seems to want to talk to remain the state-owned enterprises.
Well, indeed, and so that's one of the areas that I'm going to be most interested in when we see what Minister Mbweni has to say next week, because as we know, the government has taken a decision that SAA should be reconfigured and reworked into a sort of a new, more competitive, functional state-owned airline, but it's going to cost 10.4 billion rand upfront. And then, of course, even that reconfigured airline is not envisaged to make any money for the next 3 years. I think the projected losses over the next 3 years are 6 billion. We know that Land Bank is asking for another 10 billion that wasn't in the supplementary budget. So all of that money can only come from two places, the money to go to state-owned enterprises. It either has to come from other areas of government spending. I indicated that it's pretty hard to find areas that you can sort of easily cut. Or we have to borrow more. And the finance minister has come out very strongly with his active fiscal consolidation plan and saying we really have no more room to borrow.
Just a final question to you. We all know that we have a surfeit of plans in this country, and as one cynic said earlier this week, we've had a lot of word salad over the past couple of days. As an economist, Peter Worthington, what's the one thing that you'd like to hear this afternoon? What will make you happy?
I want to hear plans for implementation. I see three constraints to implementation. One is that we're out of money. The second is that the state is not terrifically capable. And the third is that even though the president is getting a bit of an upper hand politically against the RET faction, we still have some significant ideological divides about how to proceed on various issues of economic policy. So those are three big constraints to implementation. I want to hear how we move this recovery plan from talk into walk. That seems to me to be key. I don't think it's possible to jawbone the markets into higher confidence or businesses into a more confident outlook now just by talk. We want to know how it's going to be put into action.
Well, the talk and the walk begins at 3 o'clock this afternoon, live on the channel, and Group Chief or Group Economist at Absa, Peter Worthington, live to us in Canada. Thank you very much for joining me on Wednesday lunchtime.